afternoon and welcome to Jiggers' Place. For some reason the bumper didn't play right, but that's okay. You can always watch it next week to get the bumper. So I'm your host, Kevin Bemmel. We're here every other Thursday afternoon, 5 p.m. Pacific time. And you can't see him, but off to the side here is my very good friend, Steve Fox. He's in town for a couple of days. He's my house guest. And so he has courageously volunteered not only to try out this cocktail that I make, every time we get together at Jiggers' place, but he's going to join in the conversation, and he's going to be my bellwether as to whether I actually make a good case for reading 19th century literature. When I told him the topic earlier today, he's like, 19th century, what? So, but we'll see. It's always an adventure, right?
I feel like I'm on the Jay Leno show.
Well, yes. Well, I wish I were as good as Jay Leno.
How about Soupy Sales?
Oh, Soupy Sale. That's more my speed.
That's Soupy Sales.
Right. A lot of the people watching probably have no idea who that is.
We need Fang.
Yes, right. Fang. You're talking about Phyllis Diller's husband?
No, Soupy Sales had a character called Fang.
Oh, okay. There you go. So in the theme of today's this afternoon's show or this evening's show, if you're on the East Coast. So 19th century literature, I wanted something that evoked, England. I was thinking, what is that? Something with berries and gin, right? So, I got my cocktail designer, Chat GPT together, and we came up with something called the Blackberry Wessex. Wessex County, of course, being one of the well-known counties in England. And so here's what we're going to use. We're going to use Caroon gin. It's been made since 1824. So 19th century. This is a Scottish gin. Now you may be saying, wait, the Scots didn't drink gin. Well, it's true they're famous for their whiskey, but they also they make this particular gin. You can see by the fact that it's about half gone. It's a very good gin. At least it's very popular in my house. And then we're going to use a blackberry liqueur. This is La Vie. This actually comes from Israel. As you know, my bar is kosher, so this is a kosher blackberry liqueur. There are others out there, obviously many more that are not. The only other kosher one I think maybe De Kuyper makes one, but this La Vie has very luscious liqueurs, so this should be good. And then some lemon juice. This is my Italia lemon juice, because I never can get it together to have a fresh lemon on hand for fresh squeeze. And then just a couple of shots of Angostura bitters, the classic bitters. And then I have some fresh blackberries here for garnish. Okay, so we have the shaker filled with ice. We're going to start out with the gin. And
so that gin is, how old did you say the gin was?
Well, it's been made since 1824, so 200 years they've been making this.
That bottle is 200 years old?
No, not the bottle. The gin distillery.
I'm saying if that gin's 200 years old, bring that on over.
Yeah, it would. I think it would have evaporated by now, I would think. But okay, so we got in a way this is kind of like a martini, right? That's any kind of gin-based cocktail, but a martini in my world is gin and vermouth. So anything that doesn't have gin and vermouth is not a martini. It's just a gin-based cocktail.
I know you said 19th century, but I remember they just found cherry wine that George Washington made in the 18th century in his old home.
Oh, in Mount Vernon?
Mount Vernon.
Oh, I haven't heard about this.
They dug it up out of his basement, and there was cherries.
Wow. In
bottles from the 18th century.
And I mean, could people drink it? Did they try drinking it?
I don't know. Was it wine, or he just was preserving the cherries?
Oh, yeah. That's a great question. I don't know. I mean, I know he was a big whiskey distiller.
Huh.
Because so whiskey distilling in the United States was a big thing because we had excess grain and you couldn't keep it, so they would turn it into whiskey.
Oh, that's interesting.
Which allows it, that it doesn't spoil because now it's whiskey.
Interesting.
Okay, so we put in the gin, put in the blackberry liqueur. I just put in the lemon juice. We're going to put in a couple of dashes of.
Are you making one for me too?
Yeah.
Oh, okay, good. Yeah. That blueberry sounds really delicious.
Yeah, absolutely. Get this. Okay. And okay, so then, as you know, we shake, and we don't shake just to mix. We shake to get all the flavors together, and also we let some of the ice melt because a little bit of water actually opens up the flavors. So, I'm not sure how this is going to be, but we're going to find out.
So we have to drink before we get to the 19th century.
Correct. That's the idea.
Because there's no way I could do that without a drink.
Correct. Well, that's how I've been promoting the show. Is if you're not into 19th century literature already, it's best to start on a cocktail.
Yeah, I'm sure. I don't know how you could do that.
Well, in today's world, it's more difficult, which I'm going to talk about. Okay, so you can see the shaker is nice and frosted here on the outside, so that's good. All right, and so it's got a nice kind of
look at that.
sort of blackberry color. Yeah, why don't you come on over here? I'll share them with you.
Whoa, look at that. Oh my goodness.
All right, beautiful stuff.
This
here.
is like living large.
Oh yeah. All right, so we'll put some blackberries in.
Dude.
There you go.
I just use ChatGPT for real estate marketing.
Now
Now we're taking it to a whole nother level.
whole nother level. Here we go. Cheers.
L'chaim.
L'chaim. What do you think?
I think it's good.
Yeah, I think it's nice.
Yeah.
I'm not into sweet stuff, so.
Yeah, I think it's good.
All right, we'll go ahead and have a seat.
Okay.
We'll
I mean, the only thing I would say is I like a more like maybe more blackberry.
a little more blackberry. Yeah. Actually, I think you're right.
Well, we'll have to have another one.
There you go. Yeah, Bill can wait for dinner. All right, we're going to see you over on the other side. Comfortable, I think.
Okay.
Actually, let's kind of angle it so it doesn't have the window.
There we go.
Good. Okay. Gotta get my cocktail. Now we'll see what kind of. I haven't done this before. This is all an experiment.
Is that like certain software?
Yeah, it's using. Come on. Oh, I always forget this isn't a touch screen.
Huh. Yeah, you just have to change your angle. There you go.
There you go.
That's pretty cool.
Pretty good, right?
Yeah.
Are we getting any funny sound? Yeah, we're
I
getting
hear
a little echo.
I hear a little bit of feedback.
Yeah, let's see.
Maybe shut one of the mics. Shut the mic.
One of the
down
mics.
on
Yeah,
one
my
of them.
mic is shut down. Let's see. What's happening is it's looping through the system. So, well, it's all a work in progress, right? So, here we are with our cocktails.
This is sort of like spoken word, right? Except 19th century literature.
I'm not. I don't think I'm familiar with spoken word.
Like poetry. Like you go to a cafe.
Right. I mean, today it's literature. I mean, last week, what did I talk? I don't remember what I talked about last week, but it was something completely different.
Yeah.
Yeah, just so on at Jiggers' place, I talk about everything not related to business and finance.
Okay, so all right, so that's fine.
Could be, it's because it's Thursday afternoon on the East Coast. It's already 8 o'clock. Thursday.
Yeah, it's cool.
We're heading into the weekend. Time to relax.
I'm pretty flexible on what we can talk about.
Okay, so I brought 3 of my favorite works of 19th century literature. Many people may be familiar with Jane Austen, very well-known authoress. She wrote, her most famous are Sense and Sensibility, which was made into a very popular movie. And I'm trying to remember the names of her other books. Oh my gosh. Oh yeah, Pride and Prejudice, probably her best known book. And they're both lovely books. My favorite is one of her more obscure books, which is Northanger Abbey. And for some reason, this is not a popular work of hers. So I put together some little plot summaries just so you can get an idea, because I think people have a sense that, wait a minute, like 19th century, this is not relevant to today.
Well, this is English. That's English.
This is right? England to boot, right? So
yeah, it's English.
Right? So here's the plot of Northanger Abbey. Okay, young Catherine Morland, a naive and imaginative girl, visits Bath. Bath was a very popular seaside resort in England, and then the grand but not haunted Northanger Abbey. She gets caught up in social intrigue and lets her love of sensational novels distort her view of reality. Nobody today gets a distorted view of reality, right? Never happens.
I can't even imagine that happening right now.
No, never. People online, absolutely clear view of reality. Wouldn't you say?
I'm thinking you're being sarcastic. That's what I'm thinking.
You're right. Okay. Eventually, she learns to balance imagination with reason and finds love with the kind-hearted Henry Tilney, right? So, to my mind, this is a timeless plot.
There is definitely parallels.
Right? Okay, so that's Northanger Abbey. Again, fantastic. Then Jane Austen. So then we've got Thomas Hardy. Okay, this is the only, it's 2 women, 1 male author in this. Although one, it seems like it's ambiguous because it's a male name, but it's a female author. Okay, so Thomas Hardy, probably best known for Tess of the Dubervilles, about a fallen woman, a woman who gets seduced and all of that. And it's, again, great book. Jude the Obscure, also a great book. This happens to be my favorite. I think partly because the book is so tiny, you can carry it around with you anywhere you go. This is The Mayor of Casterbridge, okay? And here's the plot of The Mayor of Casterbridge. Michael Henchard, in a drunken rage, okay, sells his wife and child at a fair. Okay, now I will admit that's probably not something that happens today.
That's a little absurd.
That's a little absurd, right? By the way, even in its time, it was pretty absurd.
It wasn't common to sell your child and wife?
No, not in the 19th century, okay? No. Years later, he becomes a respected mayor in Casterbridge, but his path resurfaces, right? So how many times do we see situations where people did something in their past and now they're, mortified by it. They've rebuilt their life. They're now respectable. And now, right? This, by the way, this is essentially the same plot as the famous French novel with Joubert and Les Miserables. Right? So
good. I've seen the play a couple of times.
Okay,
I saw it in Toronto, like in 1997.
Okay, so 19th century literature, that book, right? Although in French, not English, but it's essentially the same, right? The Jean Valjean is a convict who rebuilds his life, but Joubert will not allow him to live his life.
I just learned something because if I remember correctly, during that play, he had a mask on. One was black, one side was black, and the other side was white.
Right. So that's
the symbolism in that.
Exactly, right? It's the two expressions of his character. Okay, so his life spirals downward as he clashes with the ambitious David Farfrae. and faces the consequences of his earlier actions. Okay? Again, look, it's not like human frailty stopped existing after the 19th century.
That's a tough one to recover from. Selling your wife and child.
Yes.
Under any circumstance.
Yes. I will say that you don't usually see happy endings in Thomas Hardy's novels.
There can't be a happy ending to that one.
Right?
I'm sure there's not a whole lot of redemption.
You cannot completely, right? Right, but that's like real life. Can we ever completely redeem ourselves?
I guess it depends on the kind of life you led before redemption.
I suppose.
Right? I mean...
Right. Now, I'm not a Christian scholar, right? But I think according to Christian theology, ultimate redemption is not really possible in this world.
I'm not...
I mean, certainly that's true from a Jewish perspective, right?
Yeah,
there are certain things that you can do,
right?
But in Jewish philosophy, right, there are certain things that if you do them, the only kapora, the only compensation you can make is to be dead.
But from what I understand, like, there's always like somebody's on death row, right? Somebody's on death row, and they're saying they're given their last rites.
Mm-hmm.
With the goal of redemption, right? I mean, even prior to that, while they're usually people who are on death row, like become religious and take Christ into their life,
right? Because
they're promised redemption before they are executed.
Well, they're promised redemption for what can be redeemed in this world, but then also, in Roman Catholicism, you have something called a mortal sin, right? A mortal sin. The only redemption for it is loss of your life. Right? That's why it's called a mortal sin, as opposed to a venial sin, for which the priest can give you.
So you can be redeemed, but you got to lose your life.
Right. So you can go through the process, but the ultimate redemption comes after you're dead.
Okay.
And by the way, that's similar in Judaism, right? If you murder someone, according to Judaism, if you murder someone, there is no redemption in this world. Your redemption comes through the loss of your life. Okay? It can be hastened by the court, or you can live out your natural life, but you're not ultimately redeemed until you're dead.
You're not forgiven.
Right. Okay. And then the third author that I'm talking about is George Eliot. Now, you would think George Eliot is a man because, George.
George wasn't a man?
George is a woman. But she took a man's name because there weren't a lot of successful female novelists around, especially writing serious.
In the 19th century.
In the 19th century.
She was English also.
English as well, right. And so she took a man's name, it's her pen name, right? But George Eliot is a woman, and you're going to ask me what her real name is, and I cannot remember her real name because I always refer to her. Oh, yeah, here it is. Mary Ann Evans was her real name. Okay,
how common,
right? So my younger sister first introduced me to George Eliot, and she gave me a book called Daniel Deronda. And I couldn't put the book down. And I'm like, wow, this guy, George Eliot, he's fantastic. She starts laughing at me. She says, George Eliot is a woman.
How interesting.
I said, wait, this is like a boy.
You were an interesting family. We hung out at baseball games when we were growing up.
Yeah. So my younger sister has a degree in theater and literature.
Oh my goodness.
So it can be all right. So here's the plot of
okay.
So the Mill of the Floss, which is this book. Again, you can see it's a small book, but this one's thick.
Right.
So, and by the way, these Koneman editions are fantastic because they're really well made, and they're pretty inexpensive, which is nice. So here's the plot. Siblings Tom and Maggie Tulliver grow up near the River Floss, hence the mill on the Floss, the River Floss. Right?
Okay.
Maggie, passionate and intelligent, struggles with the limited roles available to women. Okay. Her choices lead to scandal, and her bond with Tom is tested. In the end, tragedy reunites them in a powerful conclusion.
No, she does something that's not appropriate for the time.
Wouldn't really be appropriate even in today. Not really. So, I mean, I'm not saying that people don't do it. They did it then. They do it now. But it's look, 19th century sensibilities were more delicate than ours, but still, it's like, really, wow, okay. The ending is, I don't want to overplay it.
Well, I don't want to know what it is.
I'm not going to tell you what the ending is.
Story.
I'm only going to say the ending is shocking.
Okay.
One of the things that's so interesting about the Mill on the Floss is, as I'm reading the ending, I'm thinking, this couldn't have been written in the 19th century. They wouldn't do this.
Huh.
But it feels like a 21st century ending.
It's a real mature ending, basically, what you're saying.
Very mature ending. Yes, absolutely. So, but again, we this is a story of the relationship between a brother and a sister, between fidelity to family versus independence. All of these are still relevant today.
Very relevant.
Right? So this is my number one argument for reading 19th century literature is it's not dealing with a bunch of stuff that has no relevance to today. These stories are timeless. But look, the novel dates from, in the West, it dates from maybe the 1600s. I think Tom Jones was written late 1600s, early 1700s. That was kind of like, Tom Jones is, I think, considered the first.
I was in January. I went to Kensington Palace in London.
Mm-hmm.
And that was a really fantastic experience because all of the artwork on the walls were from the late 1600s. Busts of Isaac Newton that were commissioned back in the 16 and 1700s.
Mm-hmm.
And just all of the scholars and the paintings on the walls all evoke what you're talking about.
Yeah, right. It's amazing.
I was like floored away floored. So, but it was interesting though, because I had just spent 3 weeks in Israel, where I went to towns that were built by the Romans in 60 BC by Herod, Caesarea, and so now I'm in London in this era where these books take place, with pictures of Queen Esther that was painted.
Oh wow!
So there was this like connection that was really amazing.
Yeah.
With Ahasuerus, how do you say it?
Ahasuerus.
I can't, whatever you said, I can't pronounce it.
Right.
But it was Queen Esther with King
Ahasuerus.
Ahasuerus, a painting that was commissioned in the late 1600s.
Wow. I mean, again,
I think Queen Victoria.
Queen Victoria?
Queen Victoria?
Not in the 1600s. It would have been Queen Elizabeth.
Prince Philip.
Oh, actually, no. Queen Elizabeth would have been earlier. Who was the sovereign? I'm reading Dickens' A Child's History of England right now, but I haven't gotten to that point.
Yeah,
I'm still about 11 or 1200. So.
Yeah, I mean, I think we just blew the credibility of our conversation because I can't remember who was in Kensington. But I think it was definitely Queen Victoria.
Oh, I mean maybe later.
Yeah.
Because Queen Victoria reigned in the 19th century.
Right. So it was probably, yeah. Okay. So I guess I'm not up. You want to talk about American history? Let's talk about American history.
We'll have to do that next show.
Next show.
Okay. All right. So here are my, I'm going to make my case for 19th century literature. So first one, stories are timeless. It's like in so many cases. Okay. So next, all of these authors have very deep insight into human nature. Right. So think about it. They're not watching television. They're not listening to the radio.
They're barely reading newspapers.
Right. So they spend a lot of time. Now, by the way, we're not talking about the lower classes who have to eke out a living, right?
No.
We're talking about the upper middle class.
The aristocracy.
one step below the aristocracy generally, right? Because the aristocracy, they're the dukes, and but a lot of like what Austen is writing about is kind of the upper middle class.
Okay.
So
The bourgeoisie, maybe.
yeah, the bourgeoisie. Yeah, what we would call the bourgeoisie.
I finally get to use that. I learned that, I think, in high school or before. I got to use it.
Right. So they spent a lot of the time. Their amusement is going and visiting their neighbors,
Right.
and having conversation.
Because that's how people did
That's what
things
people
back
did.
then. There wasn't any other entertainment.
Right. I mean, there might be a dance. They might have a country fair. But I mean,
They probably drank a lot of your blue Essex.
they probably so the women hid it in their tea, but the men they yeah, for sure.
They were right out open with it.
Right, because you don't have to worry about driving. There was no driving. You might fall off your horse. Okay, see,
Yeah.
get back on. Right. Okay, so these people spend a lot of time conversing, interacting with these authors. Spent a lot of time interacting with other people. It really gave them an insight into how people think, how they behave, and I would argue that in contemporary society in America, what we call emotional intelligence or soft skills, however, these are crucial to success. But where do you learn this? So a good place to learn it is by reading these books from the 1800s, where you're reading about how people interact, what they're thinking about this, what they're thinking about this person, that person, how these situations work out. Okay, yes, they're fictional, but of course they're based on things that actually happen. So it gives us insight into how to deal with people, right? That without having to go through all of the hard lumps that we would take making ever more mistakes.
Maybe that's why in today's day and age, there's such a big emphasis on going to see a psychologist and coping, because in general, we haven't developed those skills.
I think that's part of it, certainly, right? So this is a way to develop the skills, or at least develop some knowledge and maybe a little bit of insight, where we're not having to pay $150 an hour. We're not knocking heads with other people. We're learning about it. Okay, that's number one. Okay. Number two, they provide an opportunity for intellectual growth, right? So to read, The Mill on the Floss or The Mayor of Casterbridge, right? This is not like reading, a graphic novel. It takes some concentration.
Well, because it's written in Old English.
Well, I mean, the English
Is it?
pretty
No?
contemporary. No.
It's not really?
No, I mean, not really. No, I mean, the language is beautiful. That's another point here that I have here. The language is very rich. So, these authors had larger vocabularies than a lot of people have. But the language is understandable. I mean, it's not the kind of slang we have today. And we wouldn't pick up every nuance, because the authors make references to things that were contemporary to their times based on certain words that we won't pick up on. But it doesn't really, who cares? It doesn't matter. But it takes some thinking about what's going on to get an overall sense of the book itself. So that complexity requires some intellectual vigor on our part. There's some mental vigor, right? And that's good, because we need to think more, right? Without being all wrapped up in ourselves.
Yeah, not thinking about what our problems are.
Right.
And spinning around in our heads about our problems.
Exactly. So it's a way to escape into, you could say these are the these are the antecedents to soap operas in a way. We're dealing with other people's problems, but it's not like watching a TV show, which is very passive. Reading is a much more active.
So in the book, the characters interact with each other at I would think at a fairly deep level.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, right.
Which we need more of.
Exactly.
People don't feel comfortable today talking at a deep level.
Right. And what's interesting is because of the sort of formalized rules of interaction in the 19th century, it seems, people were very careful about how they delved more deeply. But because of that, they were able to get deeper because people didn't feel invaded.
Well, here, I mean, today you have a conversation with somebody, and you can feel how uncomfortable people are
Right.
when you start asking questions, personal questions.
Mm-hmm. Right. And part of it is because there's a sort of superficial depth because of the kind of intimate things that are so commonly portrayed in TV, movies, all that. It seems like, oh, we can talk about anything because we can go watch a movie where people are copulating and wow. But that's a very superficial sense of depth. Real depth is understanding better how people think, and that makes people feel vulnerable. If I let you get an insight into how I think, now I'm vulnerable because that could potentially open me up to being manipulated.
Well, I don't know if it's manipulation. I think that what I find really interesting when I talk to people is like our conversation right now.
Mm-hmm.
I find it very satisfying in having that kind of conversation with somebody who's intelligent, who is thinking different. Like,
Right.
I didn't expect to have this conversation with you today. I barely know anything about these stories, but when you bring up the relationship with people and what makes those stories so good is the same kind of conversation we're having.
Mm-hmm.
It isn't about superficial things. So I find it very satisfying. It's a good connection to have with people, and you just don't get that very often.
Right. Now, part of it is we've been friends a long time.
Well,
right?
we know a
And
lot
we know
about
each other,
yes.
right? So we're comfortable talking about stuff.
Right.
So these books provide a way of understanding how to build that kind of mutual comfort so these kind of conversations can take place in an atmosphere where people are not reticent.
It takes time to get to know people. And usually when you just meet people, you don't have those kinds of conversations.
Right. So this gives us a sense of how can we build the kind of closeness that allows us to have those conversations. So that's number 2. Okay, number 3, social and historical awareness. So I was having this conversation actually earlier today with my trainer and his next client, who I happen to know.
Okay.
He's a psychiatrist. I love the guy. He's just a fantastic guy.
Okay.
Right? And we started talking about how, bad things are today, right? And then it was very interesting to watch. We all kind of took a mental step back, and the psychiatrist said, we really need to be careful, because if we really think about it, things were much worse going back in time. And we talked about that for a few minutes. And it's really true, right? So we have this sense that today is the worst of all times, because of course we have to live through it. But to have a sense of what was really going on, and not the sort of imagined stuff, men were clubbing women over the heads or whatever. Not these, although these books are fiction, they are set in an historical context that is authentic, that is true, right? So they give a very deep sense of what really was going on in society historically, which it gives us a mirror against which to reflect what's going on in society today.
So you wonder if you could take those stories and rewrite them in more modern times with what, replace horses with our challenges today.
Yeah. Well, and so if you've ever seen the movie 10 Things I Hate About You?
No.
Okay, so it's I wish I could remember the lead actor and actress. So it's set in a very expensive prep school in, I think, like Seattle, Washington, or something, right? And it's about this young girl who's very abrasive, hates men, sort of castrating feminist, and her sister, who's a couple years younger than her, they go to the same school. She's very into dressing really pretty. She wants to have a really active social life. And the father is a widower. Their mother has died. All he's afraid about is the girls are going to get pregnant, right?
He's trying to protect his girls.
He wants to protect his girls.
He doesn't want any. He doesn't want any boys around these.
Correct.
His girls.
He happens to be a gynecologist.
Oh.
So whenever the younger one talks about going on a date, he makes her put on the pregnant woman belly, because this is what happens to girls who go on a date, right? They all get pregnant, right? So,
and no mistake that they chose the doctor to be a gynecologist of young girls.
Exactly, right? So the young girl meets a guy who wants to go out with her. So, and the father says to the younger daughter, "You can go out when the older one goes out." And the older one has no interest in going out, right? So they hire a guy to convince, to kind of play up to the older daughter to get her to go out, so the younger one can go out, right? I mean, the movie. First of all, the movie is brilliantly done.
It's not.
Keith Ledger is the.
Is it a comedy?
I mean, it's a dark comedy.
Dark comedy. Okay.
Okay. Here's the rub. It's essentially a modern retelling of Shakespeare's The Taming of the Shrew.
Oh, interesting.
So these and if you've ever do you know the movie Cruel Intentions? With one of my favorite actresses of all times, Reese Witherspoon.
Okay, I'm not familiar with that.
It's a retelling of Dangerous Liaisons.
Okay, I remember that.
Right? So without overtly saying so, there's all kinds of contemporary movies that are actually retellings of, stories from, dramatic literature or novels, from past centuries that are updated to contemporary times, right? And many of them are quite brilliant. And I think one of the reasons they're so brilliant is because the basic bones of the stories have been
human nature before we had all these distractions of social media, television. Just when you think it's over, there's another one.
Right.
That you have to deal with.
And they've stood the test of centuries. Like Shakespeare was written, 1500s, right? So when you're retelling Shakespeare 500 years later, you're telling a timeless story. There's no question about it.
Right, you're telling a human nature story.
Right? So to get this sort of historical awareness through reading I happen to love reading history, but one of the really enjoyable ways of learning about history is to learn about history through reading a story, as opposed to just reading about history.
Reading facts versus.
Right.
Because when those books were written, it was written in the time, and the author is drawing on the colors and the ambiance and the vibes of where that person's experience is from.
Exactly. Right? Okay, so I already spoke about number 4, the rich language. It's just so beautiful. I mean, I know we don't talk that way anymore because people talk more formally. People in the middle and upper middle class talk more formally, but I mean, it's beautiful. It really, not everybody's interested in building their vocabulary, but the interesting thing is, if you take a language like Hebrew has 20,000 words in it. That's it. Those 20,000 words have to convey every idea, thought that a human being can have if they're speaking Hebrew, right? English, I think, now has like 1.5 million or 2 million words in it.
I'm learning, by the way. I'm taking Hebrew lessons right now.
Oh, okay, fantastic, right? So Hebrew is all about what are called, shareshim, right? Roots.
Right.
So you take a root, you have a root, and then you add a a prefix or a suffix to it, and you can turn the root into a different meaning.
Right, and then you can also use your tonality in saying the word that turns it into a question.
Right. So you can say Sayfair, that's a book. You can say Sapir, that's the seashore. Right? But they're spelled the same way if you take the vowels off. It's like, wait, how can the same word say book and seashore? Because they're vowelized differently. But the philosophical concept is related. The seashore is where the land meets the water, but that boundary is somewhat fluid. A haircut is where the skin meets the hair, but the boundary is somewhat fluid. Right? So, but it makes the language difficult to comprehend if you're not a native speaker.
I mean, I'm challenged.
Right. In English is a very precise language.
Well, but I think Hebrew's efficient. If you only have 20,000 words, you have to be efficient in how it works.
You do, but it's hard to be precise, right? Efficiency and precision.
Right. English, we can be specific, and precise.
Right. It's like they say. I don't remember the exact number, but in the language that Eskimos speak, I can't think of it. But in their language, there's like, I don't know, 100 words for snow or something like that. Because I look at snow and I see snow. But to someone who lives in it, there are multiple.
There's different kinds of snow. Like there's different kind of clouds in the sky.
Right. So their vocabulary developed, and it makes perfect sense. In English, again, we because so much of English is science, technology, precision is necessary. So, okay. So to develop a richer vocabulary gives us the ability to communicate better with other people. And by the way, it also gives us the ability to insult other people without them knowing it. Now that could be a benefit for some people. I'm not going to say which friend of ours that relates to.
Aren't we having dinner with him later?
Nix.
No. Okay.
If you're watching the show,
he isn't.
He does watch from time.
Oh,
to
he
time.
does.
Yeah, he does. Look,
we'll have to deal with that at dinner.
Yeah, we will. Look, he can own it. He can own it. So.
But he does own it.
He does. That's what I'm saying. He owns it. So, but anyway, there are good rationales for having a richer vocabulary. Okay, number 5. So we talked about timeless themes, right? We talked about that. Okay, so this is if you're not, you who are watching, Steve, who are with me, if you're not convinced by anything else I've said, I hope this will do it for you, right? So. Countless times now, I'm talking to people, and for whatever reason it comes up that I observe a traditional Jewish Sabbath, which means from sundown Friday to sundown Saturday, I don't drive, I don't ride in a car, I don't watch TV, I don't listen to the radio. It's a time disconnected to slow life down and just be, right? So one of the things that 19th century literature does is it allows us to disconnect from the frenetic, connected pace of contemporary life and just relax, to understand that patience and a little bit of perseverance to get through something pays tremendous dividends. That not everything that can be had right now is valued. There are things that we have to wait for that are equally, if not more valuable than the things we can have instantaneously. And we live in such an instant gratification society. I think it's a good thing to disconnect from it for periods of time and realize that, whether it's like you can't see my wine over here, but like a bottle of wine, the longer it ages, many times the better. If it's red wine anyway, the better it gets, right? And And like, look, you and I, Steve, we can own we're no longer, young guys, running around 18 years old. We get better with age, I hope.
Well, we get more patient. We don't have as much time left on the planet,
Mhm.
but hopefully we have more wisdom at our age.
I hope. Right?
Hopefully.
Hopefully.
Right?
Hopefully. Right? That's,
It
that's
depends on
idea.
the circumstance.
Right. Right. But we do recognize that what we've attained at our age, we only have attained it because we're our age. We
Right.
weren't going to get this. There was nothing we could do to get what we are now, 30 years ago.
Right. I mean, I have young boys in their early 20s, right?
Mm-hmm.
And both of my kids meditate, right? Because they feel the stress of trying to get things done,
Mm-hmm.
but they know that they have to take a deep breath.
That's good. I mean, that's amazing, right?
I think it is.
I will say, because my nephew is he's actually in his late 20s now. He's living a much healthier life, I think, than I lived when I was his age. So I think there is a recognition among what Gen Z, I guess they are.
I don't know.
Whatever.
It feels like my 24-year-old is different than my 21-year-old. In I don't know. The 3-year difference seems like a different generation.
Okay.
I don't know what it is, but it
Okay.
just seems that way.
But people rag on young people today. I think that's a mistake.
Oh, I think it's totally a mistake. I think the serious ones are doing really well.
Yeah.
The ones that I tell my 21-year-old, what are you rushing for? Like graduate and take a year off. And Dad, no, I want to get going. Like, if somebody gave me permission when I was 21 to take a year off
Mm-hmm.
to travel,
Right.
I would have loved that.
Yeah. Same. I didn't have that luxury.
I didn't have that
I had to
luxury
pay the
either.
rent.
Yeah, I didn't have that luxury either.
Right. But yeah, I think, look, there's chuckleheads in every generation.
Yeah.
But I'm skeptical about the idea that somehow, younger guys today are somehow, bigger chuckleheads than we were, than our generation. I don't think that's the case.
No, I think we were bigger chuckleheads than the kids these days.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I look at my nephew. He's a really
serious kid.
Look, he can have a good time. I was at his wedding. I met a lot of his friends. These are really great young men. They had a great time at the wedding, but they weren't getting slobbering drunk or anything. Like, they were just enjoying
Right.
the celebration of their brother's wedding.
So what you're saying is, with 19th century literature, you can learn a lot because there wasn't this pace that we have today.
Mm-hmm.
People focused on each other and wanted to create relationships.
Yeah.
That was their social way of connecting and feeling good about themselves.
Mm-hmm. And just the process, of reading one of these books, because it isn't like, it isn't just fluff reading. So we learn to be patient reading the book, and then we can translate that into being patient with each other.
Good message. Now I finally get what you were trying to get at.
Okay, full disclosure, I did not prompt him to say that.
Well, I mean, I'm just saying is, I would have never. I mean, this is surprise. I didn't know this was going to occur today.
Yeah.
I didn't know we were going to have this conversation, and the fact that you made your point is really an interesting parallel with what we need to do.
Yeah.
As adults.
Right? Yeah. Thank you. I mean, I can't sum it up better. So I'm going to leave it there.
Let's leave it there.
Okay.
Because you're starting to get a big head.
No. What?
No, not you.
So thank you very much for joining us. I see we've got a number of people live watching us. That's
We
always
have
fun.
people watching.
Oh yeah. There's people watching live.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh
yeah.
no! Now I'm getting really nervous.
So my buddy Lamin, he lives in Africa. I think it's Namibia. He tunes in almost every show.
Does he really?
Yeah. Very sweet guy. Very sweet guy.
We're going global.
Yeah. For sure.
Whoa.
But it's really look. You couldn't do this 20, 30 years ago.
No. You know,
it's
it's so
kind of
funny
mind-blowing.
in my own entertainment way. This was kind of cool.
Yeah.
Like we got to do this again.
Yeah, for sure.
I mean, I'll be in Arizona, but
it won't
but
really
we
be that
can.
much different.
No, we can do it again on another topic.
Yeah, for sure. Absolutely. Every other week I do this. So
I'll be glad to join you.
yeah, that would be great.
What I'll do is you tell me, like, if we're going to do a bottle of wine, I'll go get the same bottle of wine.
Right.
Or
Well, I'll send you the cocktail recipe, and you can make the cocktail.
yeah, I don't have as much good stuff
Yeah,
together as you, but I'll figure it out.
Yeah, I mean, the fact of the matter is, like, if I were going to make a gin, while I'm using Caroon, gin,
It's 200 years old. you said.
Yeah, exactly. So you can use any gin. It doesn't, that's part. Like when I had professional bartenders making cocktails, they're very, it has to be this.
Oh,
that.
you used to have.
So when the first season of the show,
You invited a bartender.
I had a
in?
bartender here. We turned this living room into a TV studio.
That's super cool.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
I mean, it was a much bigger thing. And look, these are professionals. So very. And when you're a professional, right? I'm just an amateur. I just want to enjoy it, and I want to encourage other people. Just enjoy it. Don't worry about the details. Just enjoy it. So you got a lemon, you got some gin, you got a whatever, a liqueur, or some vermouth, whatever it is.
What's the? A few years ago, I went to a restaurant up here in La Cienega, and where what is it when they do all these concoctions and they're like jelly shots and
Oh, yeah, I don't know that.
and there's like the drinks are smoking.
Oh yeah. I mean, yeah, they got like dry ice in them.
Yeah, they get dry ice in them.
I mean, I don't know how to do any of that stuff. To be
God, this is more of a traditional.
Yeah. This is like sort
like
of
throwback.
Yeah, cocktail culture. Yeah.
Well, the big thing in Arizona now is speakeasies. So they have these speakeasies, and they make these drinks that, depending on which ones you go to, they no longer they go back into the 20s and 30s.
Right.
And they find recipes, and then you can go to these speakeasies
Mm-hmm.
and order these drinks from the 20s and 30s.
Right.
And it's kind of a cool throwback thing.
Yeah. So there are places like that, like downtown LA.
Oh, there is. Yeah.
And I've got 2 or 3 cocktail books like that. They're old cocktail books. They're not the original books, of course. They're like reprints.
Right.
And they have all these, like, some of that. I look at this like, what the heck is this ingredient? I don't even know.
Right, they have all kinds of interesting. I mean, you have a good selection of different ingredients that you can create things with.
Yeah.
I mean, I bet you in chat we bring something modern into it.
Sure.
Which you did with your drink today is throw a bunch of those ingredients in ChatGPT and let ChatGPT come up with a really interesting flavor profile.
Right. So that's what I did for this. Is I said, please create a cocktail that a gin cocktail that exudes, Jane Austen, Thomas Hardy, George Eliot.
Wow.
And it came up with something, and I wanted to use, so it was a blueberry thing. And so then I asked it, were there blueberries in England in the 19th century? And so then it says, well, no, not really.
There weren't really?
No, there weren't blueberries. So I said, well, what kind of berries?
Blueberries are typically wild. Well, so are
Right. So they had wild blueberries, but they weren't cultivated. So most people didn't have blueberries because you had to go find them in the wild.
Right.
So I said, well, what kind of berries were cultivated? So then they gave me like 5 choices.
And one was blackberries.
And one was blackberries. They said, so then make a cocktail with blackberries. So then that's what it came up with.
So here's I get this really interesting blog, and it has some really eclectic things in it. And so outside of blueberries, and you brought this up, cocoa they're having a global cocoa shortage.
Right. Yes.
And there's a company in California that's been able to make chocolate in the lab using, and apparently they're getting investors, and it tastes just like chocolate, if not better than chocolate.
Mm.
And they're working with a Japanese company to productize this lab grown chocolate.
Wow. Because this is a huge problem because chocolate prices are going way up.
Well, the reason why all the chocolate comes from Africa, the cocoa comes from Africa, and there's a big
like
shortage.
90% of it does, yeah.
There's a big shortage because of environmental concerns in that part of the world, and so apparently a lot of chocolate companies are scrambling, and that's hence the reason you see chocolate prices.
Right. So the big companies like Hershey, there's I can't think of the other big one that's in Europe, but so they cover their bets where they buy cocoa futures and that kind of stuff. Cacao, right? But so we used to have a great bean to bar chocolate maker right down here on Robertson called Letterpress.
Guess who's calling?
Oh, there you go. So they went out of business. And I think it was in part because they couldn't sustain the costs anymore.
Oh, interesting.
So, and it's a shame because their chocolate was fantastic.
Oh, interesting.
So it's a challenging time.
All right.
Right. Well, we got to go to dinner.
Do we call this a wrap?
So thanks again for watching. Next week we're back with the full line of shows. So if you go to my YouTube channel, you will find the times there. I'm not going to take the time to do that now because the show is actually a little bit longer than we usually go, but that's fine. So I want to first of all, Steve, thank you for joining us.
It was my pleasure.
This was like really super
No
fun.
surprise on your side too. I think it seems like.
Yeah, but this was great.
Yeah,
really
you didn't think I could put two words together in an intelligent way.
No, I knew you could put two words together. I was a little three, maybe. And I'm going to sign off like I always do, which is to remind you, Marie, you're my belle, darling. You know you are. Courage at all times, my friends.